G'day everyone, Rach here from Bookpiles. Welcome to my April wrap up and haul, all wrapped up into one video. Well, that doesn't bode well. Yes, after March's 25 book mammoth haul, I reined myself in and only brought 2 books in April. Yes, what month are we in? So I figured I would actually just put it all together in the one video because it didn't warrant its own video. So yeah, I hope everyone's well, and we'll get cracking. So I'll do the haul first because it then leads into I actually read one of the books as well in April, so I can then go into the wrap up. So the first book I brought came from watching somebody, possibly the book Refuge, and yeah, I liked the sound of it, so I got it. It is Notorious by Minerva Spencer. Yes, and I believe there is a second one out or due out at some point very shortly. This is the first in a new series, Rebels of the Ton. It says the cure for a willful wife is a smitten husband. Yeah, so I don't know anything more about it really. It's an historical romance is my understanding. I'm assuming it's a historical romance. I think it is. London 1817, so it is, yeah. So that'll be read at some point soon. The second book I brought was on my Kindle, and it is called, it is by Sophie Jordan, and it's called An Heiress for All Seasons, and it's a novella, and it's the middle story in the, does it say? Yeah, a debutante files. Christmas novella. So if you remember, in March I read 2 Sophie Jordans off, and I can't think of their names off the top of my head because I can't see them easily. No, I can't see them easily. And I said at the time that somewhere I kept seeing it was they were 2 books in a series or 3 books in a series, and someone put in the description the name that I needed to look for, so I found it on Kindle and brought it, and it's Will's story, and it's just a little short one, but it fills in the gap. So I read book 1 and then I read book 2, and in book 2 Will had a wife, and I'm like, where did she come from? And this is the book that fills in that story. So I will now jump into the reading wrap up, and I'll start with this since I've got it. I will stick a picture in. If I haven't already, it'll go in. Okay. I've got to remember to leave enough of a pause so I don't end up going so this is Will and Violet's story, and Will is the brother of Ariella, oh, I can never say her name, who is the female in the second book. He's also the cousin of the Duke in the first book. Yes, I think that's right. And what did I think of this? It was it was nowhere near as good as books 1 or 2, and basically she is an American heiress, and her mother has brought her to England to marry somebody with a title basically, and somewhere along the line Will's mother encounters Violet's mother, and she invites the mother and Violet to Christmas at the country pile, and from there it's trying to get Will and Violet together with a view to marrying them off to each other, and obviously they do in the end. It's nowhere near as lovers to what's the right, hate to love, like the other, certainly book 2 in the series. I think it was just a little fill-in piece because you started reading book 2 and you're like, well, where did Violet come from? Who is she? So yeah, I read it, I crossed it off, I read all of the books. Yes. Right, I started April with the goal to getting book 5 in the 6 Tudor Queens, which is these books here. Read book 5 is Catherine Howard. This took me 20 days to read. Not any fault of the book at all. If I had been really into wanting to read it, I'd have got it read in 3 or 4 days quite happily. I just didn't want to read this book at this moment. I wanted to be reading historical romances, but I wanted this read by, must be next week. Okay, that's a note to self. Next week I've got to be looking for book 6, because book 6 is due and I wanted to be up to date, because I would actually like to finish this series this year at some point. So I needed to read Catherine Howard's story. This was a really interesting read. My history, in my mind, the history that I know of Henry VIII's wives really doesn't extend to Catherine Howard anymore. I must have learned about her, but it just does not sit in here anywhere. So all I knew about her was divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. She's the second beheaded wife of Henry VIII. So I'm like, what did she do to end up being her head put on the block, basically? So it was very interesting to read. She was a willing victim of her family's greed for power and status and wealth, basically, and they tarted her up and pushed her into Henry VIII's path, really, so she would catch his eye. She was, by all accounts, she was young. She was, does it say how old on the back she was? No. She was 19 or 20, or at the most 21, when she was involved with Henry VIII. She had led quite a scandalous previous 4 or 5 years in the home of her grandmother. Her mother died when she was quite young. Her father remarried and then went off to Calais to hold an official post for the king. So she was sent to her, she was sent to a family, was she an aunt? Her mother's sister? She was sent to a member of her mother's family initially, and she had a great time there, but things evolved, or did I can't remember what happened. And she ended up in her grandmother on her father's side of the family. I think that's right. And she sort of basically was left to her own devices in a room full of similarly aged girls who were not necessarily family members, but they got up to some pretty scandalous behaviour in their dormitory in the middle of the night with visiting males. And this is all apparently historical record. Alison writes, it's a fiction based on true historical fact, and at the end of the book she always tells you the facts that she extrapolated into the story. So I find it's a really interesting introduction to the subject, because you get an engaging story. You then get the why she conjured up the story, if you like. And then from there you can go on and read something more, I don't want to say truthful, because she's not lying necessarily about anything. She's extrapolating the facts that are on record into a story. I've got, you can see this white book, I point to it a few times, that's a words are hard. I can't even say it. He's a historical writer, historical author, historian. Jeepers creepers. That's his account of Henry VIII's wives. And I picked that up in a charity shop a couple of years ago, and I'm curious to read it, but I want to get this lot read first because I think that one will be a bit more bogged down to read in all the historical record and stuff like that. This is more engaging. So she went into her marriage with Henry VIII not a virgin, and she had to obviously trick him into believing she was. He, by this time, was suffering badly from his manky leg, and you know, he was less than someone a 21-year-old would look at and feel desire for, I guess. She proceeded during her marriage, which is how she ended up with her head on a block, by having an affair with somebody. I believe, according to this, the affair was not consummated, but once it got back to Henry VIII's ears, it didn't really matter to him anyway. He was like off with her head. The time that she spent at her grandmother's house, there were girls that were not her friends who ended up in court later, and they ended up making things very difficult for her. So the decisions she made young, before her family pushed her into Henry VIII's path, came back to haunt her basically, and in the end cost her life. It's very interesting, is that the right word? At the end of the book, both this one and Anne Boleyn's book, this book literally, she's going to the block, her head is on the block, she's thinking things, and the sentence just stops halfway through her thought. Just like that, and that's the end of the book. And I find that really, I liked the way she signed it off like that, because, you know, that's it, that's the end. Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I hadn't remembered about her at all, other than she was beheaded. It's done. I've read it. I can add it back onto the shelf with her 4 predecessors, and hopefully next week I can track down book 6, which is Catherine Parr. She is the wife that survived Henry VIII. So again, I really don't remember much about her from my history lessons, so I'm looking forward to reading that book as well. Probably won't read it this month, but we'll see. We might try it. No, I'm not going to say it. I don't know when I'll read it. So that brought me to the 20th of April, and I had about 10 days left, and I'm like, oh, now what am I going to read? My goal to break the record from March was not going to happen. So I think I read the novella next and finished that. I then reread An Offer from a Gentleman, which is book 3 in the Bridgertons. I read this a couple of years ago, and I thought I'd remembered it quite well, but I had forgotten a lot of details, so I was quite pleased. I initially was going to skim it. I was going to read, I think she has a prologue at the front. Yeah, I was going to read that, and then I was going to skim read it in an evening and just remind myself, but I really engaged with it again, so I read the whole thing properly. This was actually the first book that I read 2 years ago, and discovered the Bridgertons through, and then went on a mission to buy the rest of the books. So this is Sophie and Benedict's story, and it's basically a Cinderella retelling, and I really like this story. I like the relationship between Sophie and Benedict. It's probably, this one and book 2 are my favourite in the series. Once I had read that again, I then read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is book 4, and this is Colin and Penelope's story. I'm thinking if I can remember without a look. This one was a bit more of a meh for me, a bit like book 1, Simon and Daphne. Didn't wow me as much as books 2 and 3. I found it, my thought was, Penelope has loved Colin for years, and he's been polite to her, and he dances with her at parties, but she's just a friend, and just like that, he's in love with her, and I'm like, yeah, no. That's not gonna be, you know, it doesn't happen like that, does it? It doesn't happen like that. It was a bit far-fetched for me. So I did struggle with how it sort of went from friends that saw each other once in a while, I think I've got a cat trying to break in, to suddenly lovers and they're getting married. It was the story was alright, but it was no offer from a gentleman as far as I was concerned. So that is, yeah, so there are 8 kids, I'm partway through the series. And I will read the series, I want to read the whole series. So that's as far as I got. 4 books. Read 4 books, brought 2. Pitiful. Yeah, that's me. That's done. May. We're on to May. Okay, I will be back again soon with another video. Until then, enjoy your reading, and I will catch you in another video. Bye for now.